This is Donald Parham. You're listening to Chargers Unleashed, part of the LAFB Network. Stay jiggy.
Hey, this is Chris Rupp II, Chargers outside linebacker, and make sure you check out Chargers Unleashed. Shout out to Chargers Unleashed, Sebastian Joseph. They know the vibes. We outside.
You checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning in to Chargers Unleashed.
You're listening to the Chargers Unleashed podcast with your host, Dan Wolkenstein and Jake Hefner.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by Bet Online, Charger Bolt Family, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, as we are kind of letting the waves break on the first 3 days of free agency, we thought, okay, let's kind of just take a survey. Let's take a step back. Had a lot of free agent news to cover the last 3 days. So let's kind of turn our focus back to April 27th and the NFL draft. And much as we will be doing for the weeks leading up to the draft, there will be special guests after special guests that Dan and I have lined up. Dan Wolkenstein has been working the phones very diligently. So obviously, Dan, again, one of these days we have to get like the little alarm thing that goes off. And, when Dan Wolkenstein's working the phones, bring up like a little like phone ringing emoji, like right here in the middle of the screen or something like that. But anyways, the next few weeks leading up to the draft are going to be jam-packed, lots to cover. And we're going to kick it off today with a very special guest. Dan, as you always do, the best of the introductions for our special guest.
Stop it.
Don't get a big head about yourself, kid. Damn.
No,
Anyways,
super excited today. Friend of the show and friend of both of ours, Justin Melo from the Draft Network, a man who interviews almost every single draft prospect. It feels like year over year, who has more insight than most into the personal lives and the character of these NFL draft prospects. We're going to sit down with him, talk a little bit about Austin Ekeler possibilities. He had some rumblings of possible teams they could see him going to. Obviously, we're going to talk to him about a bunch of prospects. Of course, get his predictions on who the Chargers will get at 21 or in the second round, which you might be a little shocked at. Super fun discussion. I apologize in advance. We did have some technical difficulties with the audio. We're going to do the best we can. But again, apologies beforehand. But this is our conversation with Justin Melo from the Draft Network. Jake, before we get into it real fast, over or under 0.5 outside free agents brought in today, Thursday, March 16th.
Outside free agents brought in today. Well,
brought to the Chargers.
Everybody's kind of waiting on the news of one John Johnson. So,
ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, let's be fair. Let's go ahead and say it's going over.
Jake pounds the over. Jake, talk about our friends over at Bet Online.
Yes, Bet Online still remains the best place to find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends over at Bet Online. And as your continued source for all sports wagering information, Bet Online features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. So head on over to betonline.ag today to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. And make sure to use that promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet Online, where the game starts.
The Draft Network's Justin Melo joins us next on Chargers Unleashed. Super excited today. We have a very, very, very special guest with us today. Friend of the show, Justin Melo from the Draft Network, one of the insiders who talks to so many folks within the NFL draft circles, prospects specifically. Justin, welcome to Chargers Unleashed again. Shout out to you. How you doing, man?
Doing well, man. Pleasure's all mine. Appreciate you guys for having me on.
Of course. So lots to get into today. So let's get right into it. We're going to talk about, obviously, draft prospects for the Chargers at positions of need. Obviously, we're going to talk about some of the guys you've spoken with because you've spoken with so many of these prospects. But before that, you have kind of your finger on the pulse of the NFL quite a bit. You put out a piece recently about the possibilities for a Austin Ekeler destination. Talk to us about who you see him going to. I believe a couple of the teams you had in there have already gotten running back since, but I believe the Ravens was another destination that you saw them. Talk us through kind of what you saw.
Yeah, articles sometimes age like milk in the NFL, right? Especially when free agency is moving so quickly. In that article specifically, I had mentioned the Miami Dolphins, who I think since then have re-signed not one, not two, but three running backs, right? They brought everyone back: Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr., Myles Gaskin. I actually wrote a piece about that as well on their interesting approach to running back. I mentioned the Detroit Lions in that article, who had yet to sign David Montgomery to a 3-year, $18 million deal. But alas, one of them lives, right? The Baltimore Ravens are still there. I think they still need some running back help. And it's funny, as I was writing that article, I thought, you know what? Almost every team in the AFC West makes sense. I thought, minus the Raiders, but I go, I think I can make an argument for the Denver Broncos. I can make an argument for the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, the Chargers are not going to trade him to one of those teams. So as I started going through my options, I identified those teams. I still think the Ravens make some sense. I think they're going to be a run-heavy offense, regardless of who's back there at quarterback. Because look, if it's Lamar Jackson, the offensive identity is relatively sticking in place, right? And they could use, I think, some insurance to J.K. Dobbins and what's gone on with him injury-wise lately. And if it's not Lamar Jackson, well, it's probably going to be not a very good quarterback, right? It's certainly going to be a worse quarterback, and you're probably going to have to lean on the run game even more than they have. So I thought the Ravens made some sense. We'll see how things play out with Jackson, and we'll see how things play out with Ekeler. It's a shame you might not be able to hold on to him. I get it from both parties. He deserves an extension going into the final year of his deal. The Chargers are probably thinking, how much are we going to pay Justin Herbert soon and some of the other guys we'd like to keep together with the running back position, the way it's devalued nowadays. I'd love to see the two sides come to an agreement, but at this point, it's looking like it could be heading for a split.
Fortunately for the Chargers, the one thing they have going for them financially is you're seeing kind of the running back market right now.
Yeah.
It's not great. And
No.
so what I think Austin Ekeler is looking for, it's looking harder and harder like it's going to actually get to that. So we'll see. Maybe he comes back and they can find an extension in between. Who knows?
You just had, and I know he's not a dynamic player like Ekeler is, but you just had the rushing touchdown champion, right, from the 20th, Jamal Williams. Was it 3 years, $12 million, I think it was, or something along those lines? So it's looking pretty scarce out there right now.
Now, Justin, I know that we're past kind of the first wave of free agency, and now we're still trying to get our heads about us because April 27th is the big day that everybody's waiting for. And in between that, we've had the combine and we've had the pro days. And you've obviously been right in the midst of everything as far as getting these pieces out, as far as interviews that you've personally had with some of these players, and obviously keeping track of players that teams are meeting. And in the case of the Chargers, as far as today stands, and you correct me if I'm missing anybody here, but as far as the pieces that you have written and that you've notified about, as far as players that the Chargers have met with, South Dakota State tight end Tucker Kraft, Chattanooga offensive guard McLennan Curtis, Utah linebacker Muhammad Diabate. Am I missing anybody thus far?
Off the top of my head, no. I think I confirmed that they're going to be at the pro day for Lindsey Scott Jr., the quarterback out of Incarnate World, who was once at LSU. But other than that, off the top of my head, I can't think of any others that I reported on recently.
Now, I think the biggest one probably out of those three previous names that I had mentioned was South Dakota State, Tucker Kraft. Obviously, this tight end class is absolutely loaded. The Chargers could really look to target to bolster their tight end group in any round this year. What is it about Tucker Kraft that you saw? What was it about that interview? What do you think he brings to the table, not just as a player, but what he could bring to this Chargers team?
Yeah, I'm a fan of Tucker Kraft. I think he's not getting enough attention in this tight end class. And part of me gets it. It's easy to let him, fly under the radar. Number one, he's a small school kid. Number two, he didn't play a lot of football in 2022, unfortunately, due to injury. And then when you look at the class, it's easy to focus on the Darnell Washingtons and the Dalton Kincaids and, of course, Michael Mayers and even Luke Musgrave, who's had a great pre-draft process. But don't let Tucker Kraft get lost in the shuffle. I think he's a dynamic weapon up the seam. Yes, he's a small school kid, but it helps a little that Dallas Goedert, came from that program and has acclimated to the NFL, right? Because now at least you got a bit of a proven history that says, hey, this program, sure, they're not an SEC powerhouse, but they can churn out tight ends that perform at the next level. I think Tucker Kraft is dynamic. He's explosive, could be a game changer. You line him up everywhere, create advantageous matchups pre-snap. a tough coverage assignment for opposing linebackers and safeties. And I think he's got some blocking chops too. I don't think he's an excellent blocker, but I think he's willing and competitive, and that's better than what you get out of a lot of these tight ends nowadays. So I do really like Tucker Kraft. I think he's firmly in that second round conversation. I can't recall right this second where the Chargers are picking in the second round, but I do recall that I've got it right there in that Tucker Kraft sweet spot, right? Late 40s, early 50s.
Early 50s. Yep. Yeah, Tucker Kraft is a name that a lot of people are not talking about because of those top tier guys. And honestly, I don't even know how. I think the challenge is how far is he from that top tier? And I think that's where people wonder, where do you need to wait? How much can you wait for someone like that? And should you? I think that's a bigger question. You've talked to a ton of folks. Who are some of the standout interviews of these draft prospects that you've had that, whether it's they are good fits for the Chargers at, let's say, top positions at, like, let's say, whether it's tight end or receiver or edge. What are some of the bigger kind of noticeable impacts that you've had from some of these interviews?
Yeah, I'm still in the process. I've got so many more to do. So I'm sure the answer will look a little differently a month from now. But 3 guys kind of stick out when you ask me that so far. And 2 of them I interviewed way back. I mean, right before the Senior Bowl, as I was profiling them for the Senior Bowl. That feels like a long time ago to me. When you're
during the black and white days.
Yeah, it was 50 interviews ago. Hendon Hooker from Tennessee was really impressive. I'm not surprised at all. Probably the best human being I've come across so far. He just screams maturity, leader. Like, as I was interviewing him, it sounds a little cliche, but I mean it. You could really tell that this is a guy that his teammates are going to gravitate towards. He's a leader at the quarterback position. He's going to command respect. He's going to respect his teammates. They're going to respect him back. He comes from a great family. He's just a great guy all around, and really hard not to root for him when you speak to him. You can see him being just the consummate pro, right? That's sort of what I took away from my conversation with him. Julius Brents, the corner out of Kansas State, that has really attached a jetpack to his pre-draft stock throughout this process. He's got like the longest wingspan, some of the longest arms of all time, the length, the size. He was great at the combine. It's all there. When I spoke to him before the Senior Bowl, I kind of earmarked him as a guy that I thought was going to be really good in Mobile, and the process is playing out for him exactly like I thought it would. But when I spoke to him, you just felt that confidence and that swagger that you want at the corner position. He knows how long he is. He knows how big and physical he is. He knows how he plays the position. There's no doubt in Julius Brents' mind about how great of a quarterback he is, and I really like that. And last but not least, and I'm giving you all different reasons here, I had a really fun conversation with Mike Morris, the D lineman out of Michigan. This one just went live on the Draft Network a few days ago. I asked him a question I tend to ask every player that comes from a big school. I said, hey, so many great teammates throughout your time there. We're talking Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo. We can go on, right? It's 4 years there. If you were going to war tomorrow, you can only bring one of them with you. Who's the one that you trust to have your back? And he put a twist on it like I've never seen. He said, well, what kind of war are you talking about? Is this like a zombie apocalypse? And I'm like, that thought has never crossed my mind for that question. But I said, you know what? I'm watching The Last of Us right now. It feels like the whole nation is watching The Last of Us. So I took a chance. I didn't know if he was watching The Last of Us, but I said, let's say it's The Last of Us. You're Joel, you're Ellie, whichever one. Who's your ride or die, man? You're traveling across the country here looking for a cure. And he ate it up, man. He was like, oh no, you're putting me in The Last of Us? Are you serious? He's like, well, now I got to go up against these clickers. He knew everything about the game. He knew everything about the show. It led to a really, really entertaining conversation. And he put a lot of thought into it. It wasn't just a question he had fun with. He's like, well, I got to pick my teammate who's most resourceful. I got to think of I got a guy that I know owns a couple of boats, owns hunting knives. Like he put a lot of thought into it. So we had a real fun time, Mike Morris and I.
That's great. I love that. I mean, talk about someone who actually just like really calculates the answer to just say not just one person. Like I have to have a whole team who's good at this, who's good at this, who's good at this.
It was terrific.
That's great. So let's delve into this as far as Chargers goes. Obviously, expectations and a lot can change in between now and April 27th. But as far as your 50-foot view, Justin, as far as the biggest needs for the Chargers right now, there's obviously been a lot of names tied to different routes that they can go. A couple weeks ago was all about the wide receivers and getting speed. And then after the combine, the talk about the wide receivers is kind of, drizzled off a little bit. Everybody would, at least a lot of people would like to see the possibilities of edge at 21 to put behind Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. Then, of course, there's the tight end class. But just as far as how you feel that as we sit here today, March 16th, how do you feel like that 21 range is shaping out for the Chargers as far as what's going to be available for them?
Well, I did think for a while that it was going to be a receiver for them at 21, but I was operating under the assumption, and maybe I was naive, that there was a chance they were going to move on from Keenan Allen. That no longer appears to be the case, right? So I don't think it's going to be a receiver at 21. You're bringing Keenan Allen back. Mike Williams will be healthy. I think Palmer has proven he's at least a capable wide receiver 3. So I don't think they're going to go that route at 21. I am looking at edge and tight end, right? I think, putting another guy opposite Bosa, they're still rumored to potentially move on from Mack. I don't know that that's going to happen given all they gave up for him. They just need to start thinking about life after Mack, right? Like, how much more time does he have? And they've got a good roster. So I think they've got the luxury of thinking about, okay, if we do, do we want to take a guy that's going to come in, be our number 3 rotational guy as a rookie? And that's valuable for an edge. It's tough to acclimate to the NFL as an edge. Take one now that you can get into your system for a year. You're not putting the world on his back. Let him grow into a role. Then he can start by year 2. So I do still really like the edge position for them. I look at a guy like Nolan Smith out of Georgia. I think it's very possible he's going to go there in that range after the combine he had. I already had him in like the mid-30s, right? Like 34, 35. After the combine, I don't think it's ridiculous to think he can go 21, 22. And I think you still look at the tight ends. Whether Michael Mayer is there, if I was drafting, he wouldn't be. I would take Mayer very early. I'm extremely confident in the type of prospect he is. But I do understand there are some athletic question marks and concerns about the dynamic abilities. So maybe he's there at 21. I wouldn't think twice if he was. I also think Luke Musgrave is worthy of that pick. He's a bit of a divisive prospect. I know some really like him, some don't. I do really like him. He's another guy, by the way, that I got a chance to speak with recently. He really impressed me. You can tell football just runs in his DNA, man. And, his dad played college ball. His uncle was an offensive coordinator for the longest time. This kid loves football, breeds it, man. So there's no question about the guy that you're getting and his love for the game. So I look at those guys, with Kincaid, I'm a big fan of Kincaid, but he has been hurt throughout this pre-draft process. So I'm not convinced the team's going to roll the dice at 21. Unfortunately, you would have liked to see him perform, I think, at the combine. Again, I'm a huge fan of the prospect and the player. When I'm thinking at 21, it's such a premium pick. I think I'd lean towards like a Nolan Smith or one of those healthy tight ends that's still on the board.
Dan, let me piggyback on one thing there, just real quick before you get into your next question. I felt that watching Nolan Smith's combine, it reminded me a lot when Von Miller was coming out. And during those pre-draft processes before the combine, they had him slated like in the teens. And then obviously we went out and destroyed the combine, rocketed all the way up to number 2. How big do you see the rise for Nolan Smith? Because after people watched that, everybody was like, oh, he could possibly go into the top 10 now. He may not even be there by the top of the 21. What's more of the realistic idea as far as after, that combine and this pro day?
Look, you can never rule it out, I always say, because it always takes one team to fall in love, right? Like, I don't think 31 teams had a first-round grade on Paul Strange last year, right? But lo and behold, we ended up with him in the first round. So it takes only one. For me personally, getting into the top 10, I think it would be high. Like, I'm still a guy that's going to trust the tape first and foremost. And I didn't see a top 10 prospect on tape. I did see a top 35 prospect on tape. And then with the attributes and the skill, what we saw at the combine, I am comfortable saying, okay, throw 35 out the window. Let's look at maybe the 20 to 25 range. When I look at top 10, you're going to have Will Anderson Jr. go in the top 10. I still think Miles Murphy is a top 10 pick. I think Tyree Wilson is a top 10 pick. who knows what's happening with Jalen Carter right now? It's really difficult, and there's obviously other things at bay there with some of the off-field stuff. I think the talent on tape, there's no doubt, is a top 10, top 3 type of player. So if all 4 of those guys go in the top 10, and I think 3 of them almost certainly will, I don't think I could justify taking Nolan Smith in the top 10. Stranger things have happened, as you pointed out there, Jake. But ultimately, I think you get to that 2025 range where you should be more comfortable.
We're talking to Justin Melo from the Draft Network, NFL draft prospect and reviewer extraordinaire. We're going to get you out of here. 2 more questions. We're obviously going to put you on the spot here and ask you about some predictions for the Chargers on day 1 and day 2. But before that, last question beforehand. Offensive line, linebacker, and then secondary are kind of the 3 tertiary needs for the Chargers that you see as like kind of a day 3 need. So not necessarily day 1 or day 2, but who are some like day 3 gems that, you know, everyone's not talking about because they're not day 1 or 2. They're not going to be on the top of everyone's board, but some that you think could be high value picks at either linebacker, offensive line, or secondary.
Well, some of the guys we talked about that they met with fit that criteria, right? I think McClendon Curtis is probably an early day 3 guy. So versatile, can play like 4 or 5 positions. It's crazy because he's got those 34-inch arms, I think they are at least. And you think about, okay, he played tackle. He's got, he certainly meets the arm length requirement, surpasses it. Do I want to keep him there? But I personally like him better at guard. I just think some of the foot speed concerns for me would kick him inside. But he's a guy that they like. Again, I was told they met with him. The versatility is there. He fits a need. I think he fits a bit of an identity as well, what they want up front. I look at linebacker. I talked about Mo Diabate, who they met with. Dynamic athlete, one of the biggest snubs at the combine this year. I really can't come to grips with why he wasn't there. He should have been. In my opinion. Another linebacker that sticks out to me on day 3 is the kid from Tulane, Dorian Williams. He was there at the Senior Bowl. Unbelievable measurements, right? I think he's got 34-inch arms, something ridiculous on him, vines for arms. Of course, he's today's linebacker, right? Uber athletic, uber energetic, sideline to sideline. When it comes through playing through contact, that's where he struggles, right? And you've had some guys like that, I think, recently there in Los Angeles, right? Those undersized backers that struggle to fight through contact. But we're talking about day 3 here, right? They can't all be perfect. If I can get a heck of an athlete, which I think Dorian Williams is, and I think there's gonna be a role for him at the next level. I think he's really good in coverage, gets to his landmarks. I really like him in zone. I think he reads zone really well. So I think there's a spot there. And I think Brandon Staley and him, I think they would align with how Staley wants to attack, certain coverage schemes and what Williams is capable of providing. So those 3 guys come to mind for me.
Okay, put it in the spot. We're going to have a bunch of folks talking NFL draft predictions for the Los Angeles Chargers. Someone's going to be right. Someone's going to have their flowers at the end of this draft season. So, Justin Melo, day 1 and day 2. Give me 2 names that you predict will be drafted by the Chargers, either at 21, I think it's 54, or in round 3.
All right, I'm going to give you 2 names. I feel good about Luke Musgrave. I do. I just think when you've got, Justin Herbert there, you've got a franchise quarterback, I can see this Chargers regime going, you know what? We go as far as Justin takes us. Let's go get a dynamic tight end. Let's get a number 3, number 4 passing game option, especially if we're losing Austin Ekeler. Let's keep in mind how many balls he catches, right? There are going to be some targets to go around, right? I think he had, 107 last year? So there are going to be some balls to go around, right? If he leaves. Yes, they've got good receivers. They've got a tight end there in Gerald Everett that's still there as of now. I know he was a potential cap casualty. We'll see what happens with him. I just think they're going to go out and say, let's get a dynamic weapon. Let's get a guy that's going to threaten up the seam. I think he's more explosive, more athletic than Gerald Everett is, especially at this point in his career. I can see them just going full on investing in Justin Herbert. The second name I'll give you, I'm going to roll the dice on a second round edge rusher that I really like is Will McDonald. Out of Iowa State. The measurements are incredible. This year the production took a bit of a step back because they asked him to reduce inside more often than he did in 2021. So the sack production dipped a little. That doesn't concern me at all. I think he's an edge rusher all day long. If anything, I appreciate the versatility that, hey, if we want to kick him inside on 3rd and obvious, get another edge rusher on the field, we can do that. And I think it fits what they're looking for. If they're keeping Khalil Mack and they don't need an immediate starter, I think Will McDonald's the perfect candidate to come in. You mold him a little in year one. You get him back to playing on the edge full time. That's going to take, again, a bit of a transition period since he didn't do a ton of it in 2022. I just love how that comes together, right? We're going to take a chance on the athletic traits. We've seen double-digit sack production from him in the past. Let's get him into our program. Let's get him ready to play a full-time role on the edge. He can spell Khalil Mack and Bosa. He can play on third down, reduce inside if we want him to. And then by 2024, I think he's starting opposite Bosa full-time.
Luke Musgrave, Will McDonald, 2 names.
I love this personally. I'm a little bit surprised, happily, that you sent Will McDonald to the Chargers in the second round, because I'm a huge fan of Will McDonald. I think he's an athletic freak. My thought process is just, would he even make it to the Chargers in the second round?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I thought he looked so good throughout this process. But is it 48 they pick out there in the second round?
I think it's 54.
54. Yeah, I see him in like that, 45 to 55 range. It may be a little specific. I don't think he's someone that goes super early 30s. That would surprise me a little. But I do think that as soon as you get to that 40s, to 55 range, that's where I think is the sweet spot for him. So he'd make it there to 54. You never know.
All right, Justin Melo, huge thank you to you. I'm going to put you on the spot here one more time before you hit me out here, and this will be a rapid question. Chargers fans have been clamoring for speed for like 3 decades, it feels like, but for the better part of 2 seasons now. 1, 2, 3 day, doesn't matter. If the Chargers need an offensive weapon speed guy, and you're looking for value pick, not necessarily the best, value pick at speed, who's your guy in this draft?
Well, I don't know how great the value is, because I do think he's going to go in the top 75, maybe even a lot earlier than that. Is Tyler Scott, the receiver out of Cincinnati, right? I think that would be a really good fit for the Chargers. And that might be a guy you think of at 54. And he may be there, he may not. I'm having a hard time, coming to terms with exactly where he's going to go, because I can see it in the early 30s, in the early 40s for a team that just says, hey, we need speed. There are not a lot of speed guys in this class, and that was reflected by the 40 times at the combine, right? Yeah. So, but I'm looking at a guy like him. I think he'd be perfect to take the top off defenses there in LA, and they do need a guy like that, right? And then the other one, I'm going to butcher the name, but you'll know who I'm talking about, is the Princeton wide receiver. You want to talk about day 3? Andre Isubas, I believe it's pronounced.
Everybody says his last name differently. So
I think he says it differently if you get him on 2-3 different conversations now. But he's a guy that I'm intrigued by. I wish the Senior Bowl went a bit better for him. I think you saw some of the rawness that's still there in his game. But you want to roll the dice on a day 3 guy with that kind of speed and that kind of size, that kind of vertical ability. So I've given you 2 names there. I think Tyler Scott is firmly a day 2 guy, but I think the kid from Princeton's an early day 3 guy, and I think either one would fit the Chargers well.
The kid from Princeton reminds me of a raw Christian Watson from Ergo.
That was the talk on him. That was the whispers going into the Senior Bowl is this kid about to Christian Watson the Senior Bowl? And that's what I kept hearing. And unfortunately, it wasn't quite that. Watson had a great week out there. The Princeton kid was just a bit more raw. I think needs a little more seasoning, but he would get it in LA, right? Some terrific offensive coaches there now, especially with Kellen Moore at OC. He'd be playing behind the likes of Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Palmer, so they wouldn't have to rely on him too much. And once they draft Luke Musgrave, as I said they will, then he'd be behind him in the pecking order as well for targets. So we'll see how the whole thing plays out, but I like both those guys.
You heard it here first. Luke Musgrave to the Chargers at 21, according to Justin Melo. Justin, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure. We always read your articles, seeing all the interviews you have with all these prospects. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing the Lord's work for so many of us. You can find Justin Melo on Twitter at JustinM_NFL. Justin, thank you so much for hopping on. Friend of the show, you're welcome anytime, all right?
Pleasure's all mine, guys.
Thank you so much.